She called my wife nobody. That's the word that did it. Not the shove. Not the screaming in the middle of my daughter's graduation party. The word nobody. I heard it clearly from across the room, and I stood there holding a glass of iced tea, and I made a decision that I didn't tell anyone about until 6 months later. My wife's name is June. We've been married 31 years. She raised our daughter, Leah, through 2 moves, a layoff that almost broke us, her own mother's death, and every ordinary hard thing in between. She made Leah's Halloween costumes by hand until Leah was 12. She drove 4 hours round trip every Saturday for 3 years so Leah could train with a better swim coach. She is not nobody. She is the reason our family exists in the shape it does. My son-in-law's name is Preston. I want to be fair here because I think fairness matters even when it's hard. Preston is not a bad person in the way that word usually means. He's not cruel by nature. He's weak, which I think is actually worse because cruelty at least requires a kind of conviction. Weakness just bends toward whatever's easiest. What's easiest, with Preston, is always his mother. Her name is Vivienne. I'm going to describe her the way I describe a weather pattern, because that's actually the most accurate way. She moves into a room and changes the pressure. She has a way of speaking that sounds like a compliment until you're driving home and you realize what she actually said. The first time I met her, at a dinner about 8 months before the wedding, she looked at June's blouse and said, "Oh, what a fun color. I could never pull that off at my age." June was 54. Vivienne is 59. I noticed it. I logged it. I didn't say anything, because at that point I was still in the phase where you give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she's nervous. Maybe she's not good with new people. Maybe that's just how she talks. You give the benefit of the doubt because you want your kid to be happy, and Leah was happy. I could see it every time she looked at Preston. So I kept my mouth shut, and I kept being polite, and I kept watching. Leah and Preston got engaged in October 2 years ago. He proposed at the restaurant where they had their first date, and he called me beforehand to ask my blessing, which I appreciated. He was nervous on the phone. I told him yes without making him sweat through it. When they came to the house to celebrate, June had already made Leah's favorite cake, lemon with cream cheese frosting, because Leah had accidentally mentioned what was happening that evening. June had driven to 3 stores to find the right lemons. That's the kind of woman she is. Vivienne arrived 40 minutes late, brought a bottle of wine that she handed to Preston rather than to us, and spent most of the evening showing Leah photos on her phone of venues she had already started researching. She hadn't asked. She just started. The wedding planning is its own story that I won't tell in full, because it would take longer than the marriage itself. What I'll say is this. There were 2 visions for what the day should look like, and they did not overlap. June wanted to help where she was wanted and stay out of the way where she wasn't. Vivienne wanted control of everything and called it being supportive. By the time the venue was booked, June had been quietly moved out of 4 different conversations she'd been part of. She stopped bringing things up at planning dinners. I watched her get smaller at those tables. That bothered me more than anything Vivienne ever said directly to me. Leah graduated with her MBA in May. She'd been working on it for 2 years alongside her job, and it was a real accomplishment. She did it mostly alone, with June proofreading papers at midnight, and me making sure she didn't fall apart during the hard semester when she was also planning a wedding. The graduation was on a Saturday. The ceremony in the morning, a party at our house that afternoon. We'd rented tables and chairs, hung lights in the backyard. June had been cooking for 2 days. About 40 people. Family, friends, a few of Leah's colleagues. Preston's family arrived as a group, which is how they always arrive. Vivienne and her husband, her sister and brother-in-law, 2 cousins, a family friend I'd met once. They came in together, and they sort of expanded into the space the way a group does when it considers itself the main event. Fine. I'm not precious about that. I greeted them, I got drinks, I did my job as a host. The party was going well. Better than well. Leah was glowing. She'd worn a yellow dress, and she was laughing with her friends from the program. And every time I looked at her, I felt that specific kind of proud that doesn't have a good word for it. June was moving between the kitchen and the backyard, making sure plates were full, making sure everyone had what they needed. She'd barely sat down in 4 hours. I was standing near the drink table when I heard the voices rise. Not to a shout, not immediately, but I know the register of trouble. I turned around. Vivienne was standing near the kitchen doorway. June was about 4 feet from her. I couldn't hear all of it from where I was, but I heard enough. Something about the seating, Something about how one of Vivian's relatives hadn't been given a seat at the main table. The way June was holding herself, I could tell she was being calm. She's always calm first. She gives people that. She was probably explaining something reasonably, the way she does. Then Vivian stepped closer to her, and she said, loud enough that the people nearest to them went quiet, "I don't know why you keep inserting yourself. This is Leah and Preston's day. Nobody asked for your input." I was already moving. June didn't respond. That's who she is. She went very still in the way she does when something has genuinely hurt her, like she's holding all of it inside so it doesn't spill on anyone else. Her face didn't crumple. She just went still. Vivian wasn't finished. She said, "Frankly, nobody needs you hovering. Let the kids have their day without you making it about yourself." Nobody. Twice. I reached them. I put my hand on June's back. I looked at Vivian and I said, very quietly, "We're done with this conversation. That's all." Then I walked June to the kitchen and I closed the door and I held her while she cried. These quiet, controlled tears that she was clearly furious at herself for having. And I told her I was sorry. I told her she had done nothing wrong. I told her she was everything. Then I went back outside. Preston was standing near the pergola talking to one of his cousins. I don't know if he'd seen it. I don't know if he heard it. I know he didn't come to find us. That's the thing that I keep coming back to. We were in that kitchen for about 7 minutes. He didn't come. I'm not a man who makes scenes. I've never been that. I was raised in a house where you handled things quietly, and you didn't air family trouble in front of other people. Some people think that's repression. I think it's dignity. What I did for the rest of that party was act like a host. I refilled drinks. I talked to people. I watched Leah laugh with her friends, and I let her have that because it was her day and she didn't know what had happened, and I was not going to take that from her. Vivian spent the rest of the afternoon like nothing had occurred. That's a skill, I suppose. A particular kind of social armor. I said goodbye to her when she left. I shook her husband's hand. I smiled. I had made a decision in the kitchen while I was holding June, and it was not a decision made in anger. It was made very clearly, in a calm place, the way I make most decisions. I have a way of knowing when I'm done. I don't always know it immediately, but when it arrives, it's final. That night, after everyone had gone home and June was asleep, I sat on the back deck for a while. We had paid $700 to rent those tables and chairs. June had started cooking Thursday evening. She'd made a rosemary lemon chicken, pasta salad, a fruit platter, 2 different dips, a vegetable tray, and the cake for 40 people. She'd done it because she loves her daughter, and she wanted the day to feel like something. I sat on that deck, and I thought about 31 years. I thought about the Saturday mornings when June drove Leah to swim practice, while I made breakfast for when they got back. I thought about the year June worked doubles, because we needed the money, and she never complained, not once. I thought about what it means to call someone nobody. The following week, I called Preston. He was surprised, I think, by how normal I sounded. We talked for about 20 minutes. At the end, I told him that June would not be attending family gatherings where Vivian was present. I wasn't asking him. I wasn't making it a fight. I was informing him of a decision I had made on behalf of my wife, because she wouldn't make it herself. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's pretty extreme, Dad." I said, "What happened at the party was extreme. What I'm describing is a boundary." He said Vivian was upset. He said she felt like she'd been misunderstood. He said maybe if everyone just sat down and talked. I said, "Preston, I'm not interested in a conversation where your mother explains what she meant by nobody. I know what she meant." We left it there. I want to be honest about what the next few months looked like, because I think people sometimes tell these stories and skip the hard part. The hard part is the silence. There was a birthday, Leah's, in July, and we celebrated separately. June and I took Leah to dinner at her favorite Italian place, just the 3 of us, and it was genuinely lovely. But I watched Leah glance at her phone twice during dinner, and I knew she was navigating something. She wasn't saying anything. She was trying to hold 2 separate worlds and keep them from colliding, and I felt for her. This wasn't her fault. Preston called me in August. He wanted to have breakfast. "Just the 2 of us," he said. I agreed, because I meant what I said. I wasn't trying to blow up their marriage. I wasn't trying to make Leah choose. I just wasn't going to let my wife be erased quietly. We met at a diner near his office on a Wednesday morning. He looked tired. He ordered eggs and didn't really eat them. He told me that Vivian had started therapy. I told him I was glad to hear that. He told me that she understood she had said something hurtful. I asked if she'd told June that. He said not yet. I asked why. He didn't have a good answer. I said something to him then that I'd been thinking about for weeks. I said, I've been watching you since you started dating my daughter. You're a good man in the ways that are easy to be a good man. You're faithful, you're employed, you're kind when things are comfortable. What I need to know is whether you're the kind of man who can be good when it costs you something. Because this costs you something. Standing up to your mother costs you something. The question is whether you think June is worth that. He stared at his eggs for a while. He said, she is. I said, okay, then show her. I paid for breakfast. We shook hands in the parking lot. He looked like he was carrying something heavy. I thought, good, he should be. That weight is what it feels like to be a grown man with two families who both matter. I don't know exactly what happened in the weeks after that. I know that Preston talked to his mother, because June told me. Vivienne had called her, not texted, on a Thursday afternoon in September. June talked to me about it that evening after dinner. She said Vivienne had been formal at first, and then something in her voice changed and she'd said, I know I spoke to you in a way I shouldn't have. I'm sorry for that. I'm genuinely sorry. June said she'd thanked her, and they'd talked for about 15 minutes about other things. Vivienne's garden, a trip she was planning, something small and ordinary, and that by the end it felt almost normal. I asked June how she felt. She said, cautious, but better. That's exactly right. That's the honest answer. Not healed, not fixed, not suddenly close. Cautious, but better. That's what real things sound like. Preston and Leah came to the house for dinner in October. The four of us, just like we used to. June made her rosemary chicken again. I think on purpose. I think because she wanted to reclaim that recipe. And we ate on the back deck because the weather was still holding. We talked about normal things. Leah's job. A trip June and I are planning for our anniversary. A show Preston had been watching. The conversation moved the way a good conversation does, without anyone working too hard at it. At one point, Preston looked across the table at June and said, Dinner's incredible. Thank you for going to the trouble. June said, It's never trouble for family. I looked at her when she said it. She was looking at Leah. And I thought, that's the whole thing. Right there. That's who she is. She doesn't need the last word. She doesn't need the dramatic moment. She just keeps being exactly herself. And she waits for the people around her to understand what that's worth. The Thanksgiving question came up in late October. Preston mentioned that Vivienne wanted to know if we'd consider joining the family dinner this year. Not at Vivienne's house, at Preston and Leah's place. Neutral ground, his words, he said. His mother understood that things would need to be different, that she would need to be different. June and I talked about it. I asked her what she wanted, not what she thought she should say, but what she actually wanted. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I want to try. I don't want to hold on to this forever. That's not who I want to be. So we said yes. I'm writing this about 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I don't know exactly how it will go. I don't know if Vivienne will walk into that room and be a different version of herself, or whether the change is real, or whether it's surface. Some things you can only learn in real time. What I know is that June will walk in there with grace, the same way she walks into everything, and she will give the situation a chance because that's the kind of person she chose to be a long time ago. What I also know is this. The thing that changed wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a blowout. It was a decision made quietly, communicated clearly, and held without wavering. Nobody got screamed at. Nobody threatened anyone. I just decided what I would and wouldn't accept on my wife's behalf, and I told the truth about it, and I didn't move. I think there's a version of this story where I say something in that backyard the afternoon of the party, where I make a scene, where I match Vivienne's volume or worse, and in that version, nothing changes. Vivienne becomes the victim. Preston defends her. Leah is caught in the middle. The wound hardens into a scar before it has a chance to heal. What I did instead was say 2 sentences and then walk away. I chose the door that nobody else in the room could see, and every good thing that came after came from that. My wife is not nobody, she never was. It just took some people longer than it should have to understand that, and I made sure they had the chance to get there.